Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're tracking the wild evolution of how invisible forces shape, well, everything we think. From ancient stone carvings all the way up to modern media, we are looking at the ultimate arms race of influence. Let's get right into it. So, who really controls what you believe? It's a heavy question, right? To figure that out, we need to look at how the delivery systems for information have completely transformed over the centuries. But, and here's the crazy part, the psychological tactics they use to persuade us, those have remained strikingly similar. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover the birth of spin, the First World War machine, engineering the public mind, the screen and the state, and wrap up with the invisible information war. Before we go any further, let's establish a baseline definition. Propaganda is communication designed to shape beliefs and actions. It's often biased, sometimes entirely misleading, and relies really heavily on selective facts or emotionally charged language. The most important thing to keep in the back of your mind today is this. We're talking about the art of persuasion, absolutely not the pursuit of truth. All right, Section 1, the birth of spin.
People have been doing this for a really, really long time. I mean, way back in 1274 BC, Pharaoh Ramses II was basically sanitizing battle records on Egyptian stone reliefs. If a battle ended in a stalemate, he just ordered the artist to carve it out as a complete, unilateral, divine triumph. Amazing, right? Then you see the Persian political rise in 515 BC on the Behistun inscription. Jump ahead, and there's a massive leap in 1450 with the printing press. And by 1622, Pope Gregory XV essentially institutionalized the actual word when he created the College of Propaganda to spread the Catholic faith. So the tech goes from literal stone to paper, but the overarching goal? Exactly the same.
Moving into the 19th century, Napoleon completely changed the game. He pioneered this mix of strict domestic censorship paired with aggressive international spin. Like he would commission these grand heroic paintings specifically to counter reports of French atrocities. He even went out of his way to covertly plant pro-French stories in foreign language newspapers. He actually funded a paper called the Argus of London that was specifically designed to look like it was written by Englishmen just to attack enemy morale. Oh, and he distributed leaflets promising liberty to enemy troops. When you look at it, it's a remarkably modern media strategy for the 1800s. Section 2, the First World War machine. Now let's look at the British Wellington House operations during World War I. They quickly figured out that crude boasting wasn't going to win over neutral countries like the United States. So what did they do? They recruited top authors, guys you definitely know, like H.G. Wells and Arthur Conan Doyle. By 1916, they had circulated over 7 million pamphlets internationally. But here is the real kicker. They targeted American journalists with these very dry, factual-sounding academic tracts, while simultaneously fabricating, or at least heavily amplifying, deeply emotional atrocity stories coming out of Belgium. They understood that pairing intellectual credibility with raw emotion was the absolute key to swaying global opinion. Meanwhile, Germany took a totally different, much more covert approach to destabilizing their enemies. 9 tons. That is how much gold the Germans secretly delivered to the Bolsheviks. 9 tons. They recognized that sometimes the absolute best way to undermine your enemy is to just fund their internal critics. So they secretly paid them to spread anti-Tsarist propaganda right inside Russia. Let's bring it back to the US and see how this actually bled into domestic policy. When America entered the war, the Committee on Public Information started framing the enemy as Huns. But what's truly fascinating here is how that international wartime hysteria was leveraged for local issues. By framing German-American brewers as unpatriotic threats to the war effort, this propaganda indirectly paved the way for the 18th Amendment. Yeah, prohibition. It just shows how a narrative designed for one specific purpose overseas can completely reshape society at home in totally unexpected ways. On to Section 3, engineering the public mind. Consider this, honestly, pretty chilling mindset from Edward Bernays, the guy often called the father of public relations. He worked on U.S. propaganda during the war and then, well, he brought those exact same skills over to the private sector. He openly argued that the conscious manipulation of the masses was an important, necessary element in a democratic society. He basically said that we're governed by invisible men pulling the strings of public opinion. It shows perfectly how wartime news engineering transitioned seamlessly into peacetime corporate and political strategy. We can contrast that Western PR approach with the Soviet system.
They divided influence into two totally distinct concepts. First, you had agitation, which was all about stirring up immediate political unrest and action. And second, propaganda, which was strictly the intellectual dissemination of Marxist teachings and economic theory. And trust me, they were serious about delivery. They literally built the world's largest airplane at the time, stuffed it with a radio, a printing press, and a film projector, just to distribute these two forms of influence from the sky across their incredibly vast nation. No way to escape that.
Okay, Section 4, the screen and the state.
So how exactly did film change the battlefield? Well, this new, highly visceral medium was a goldmine for political interests. It allowed governments to manufacture popular consent or just completely demonize an enemy on a massive scale. I mean, static posters could simply never achieve what moving pictures could. You can really break down this cinematic playbook into three distinct steps. Step 1, forging a national myth. For instance, Soviet directors literally staged the storming of the Winter Palace for the movies simply because there was no real footage of it. And guess what? People accepted the film as historical reality. Step 2, creating the justification for war. Nazi filmmakers, for example, laid the psychological groundwork for invading Poland by producing highly emotional films depicting the alleged suffering of Germans living there. And finally, step 3, demonizing the enemy. Whether it was US animation studios pumping out cartoons like Der Führer's Face or Soviet dramas depicting Axis cruelty, film became the ultimate reality distortion field for literally every nation involved. And regarding that second step, creating a justification for war, we have this very stark quote from Adolf Hitler in 1939. Looking impartially at the historical record here, this perfectly highlights the mechanics behind Operation Himmler. That was a false flag operation, totally engineered by the state, purely to provide a fake media narrative of Polish aggression. As he blatantly pointed out, the credibility didn't matter. The victor wouldn't be asked if they told the truth. The only goal was to manufacture a pretext for war. Now, as the airwaves got super crowded during World War II and going into the Cold War, the tactics had to adapt. Governments utilized what we call white propaganda. This was clearly identified stuff, like the BBC, Voice of America, or Radio Moscow, openly broadcasting their state's perspectives. But they also fought back with black propaganda. This was completely disguised. For example, the British ran these fake German-language radio stations that were designed to sound perfectly legitimate to local listeners, right? But then the broadcasts would weave in these subtle, negative twists, secretly designed to totally undermine enemy morale. So clever. Finally, Section 5, the Invisible Information War. Look at this statement from Fidel Castro back in 1955 during the Cuban Revolution. Propaganda is the heart of our struggle. He said they must never abandon it. This really highlights how revolutionary leaders across the globe completely understood the new rules of engagement. They knew, without a doubt, that modern conflicts are won in the minds of the people way before they are ever won on the physical battlefield. Looking objectively at the Vietnam War, we see these psychological operations taken to, honestly, astonishing extremes by the CIA. You had Operative Edward Lansdale actually engineering hoax threats about dropping nuclear bombs on Hanoi just to spur refugee movements. The agency forged communist pamphlets that were so incredibly convincing, they fooled both the Viet Minh and American journalists. They even went as far as manipulating North Vietnamese astrology reports, yes, you heard that right, astrology, just to negatively impact civilian morale. It shows this highly specific, kind of bizarre dedication to behavioral manipulation. But here's the really crucial takeaway from all of this. Despite all of those meticulously engineered efforts, by 1971, a full 70% of polled Americans thought military involvement in Vietnam was a mistake. Why? Because the stark, visual reality of the war, reported on the evening news, utterly exposed the government's relentlessly upbeat narrative. This created a massive credibility gap. It proves that while propaganda is undeniably powerful, it hits a brick wall when it completely contradicts the observable reality of the public. I'm going to leave you with this thought as we wrap up our explainer today. As these mediums continue to evolve, moving from ancient stone carvings to the incredibly complex social media algorithms we deal with today, are we actually getting better at spotting the spin? Or are the invisible architects of public opinion just getting better at hiding it? The technology, the delivery methods, they're always going to change. But the ultimate target, our minds, that remains exactly the same. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the history of influence. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.